Right, welcome everybody to tonight's session on how to write a successful application for external funding. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Paul Bailey. I'm Diocesan Giving Advisor at the Diocese of Manchester. I've also got joining me tonight uh, two wonderful and knowledgeable speakers. Reverend Paul Monk, who is the Vicar of Ashton-under-Lyne, and Heather Ford, Church Support Manager from Ecclesiastical Insurance, who also, back in the day, I hate to say how many years now, used to be our Church Buildings Manager at the Diocese of Manchester. So, and both of them have got long-standing experience, as have I, that we can bring to this evening's session. So, a few introductory things to work through. So, oops, clicked on too far. We've already gone through about muting sound. Um, if you've got the ability to use the chat function and just let me know who you are and which church you're from, that'd be really helpful for me rather than navigating multiple screens this evening as host of tonight's session, just so I can let people from the Diocese of Leeds and Chester and Blackburn to let them know which churches have attended tonight's session. That'd be really useful. You can also use the chat function to type questions in as we're going along. We'll keep the questions to the very end, though. As I say, I'll stop the recording so that we can go through any questions in the chat. But you've also going to have the ability to ask verbal questions at the end. And if you are in the laptop version of Zoom, you'll know that on the bottom line there's a menu bar where you can do that. If you're asking a question, let me just let these other two people to come in. There we go. So you can ask a question by sticking your virtual hand in the air using the reactions button. You could just stick your hand in the air and we'll keep an eye out for you on the video feeds. Or if everybody's being shy, just unmute yourself and start talking over the top of either me, Paul, or Heather at the end, whoever's speaking at the time. Uh, the other things that you're going to get, as well as the YouTube link with the recording in, is you're going to get a copy of the slides. So a PDF version of the slides will be sent to you with the hyperlinks embedded in. You'll also get two other documents. So we'll get the introductory terms and jargon in this Jargon Made Easy PDF document, covering things like what's a grant, what's restricted or unrestricted funding. It's a really useful sort of A to Z type guide. And then there's a second document that we'll be sending out to you, which is a guide to grant funding. It'll include a lot of the stuff that we're covering in tonight's session, and more. You'll be getting that document sent to you as well. So, with that, I'm going to hand over to Paul so that Paul can talk our way through the first slide of the evening. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. A few words about myself first. I've been in Ashton-under-Lyne now for about 11 months. Before that, I was vicar for two churches in nearby Oldham for about 15 years. Before that, curate, also in Oldham. But before that, I was a research scientist. I only mention that because it's quite an interesting background, very useful in terms of both numeracy and literacy, but we'll see that later. You want money. You want money for something in your church. What I'm going to describe, not just this slide, but many, many slides, is how to get money that is going to serve the purpose of your church. All the way through, I'm presupposing that the money you want is for the kingdom of God. You want to do something that is godly based. Now, a lot of the projects that you're wanting to do you won't be allowed to say it is Christian. Nevertheless, that's not really going to be a big problem. We'll discuss that later as well. The overall thing that you want to do, I'm going to use the word project. That project is usually going to be cut up into mini bits, phases, whatever. But really, there are three basic strands within your project. Your project might be just one of them, might be all three of them too. Firstly, capital. A capital project is involving something permanent. For example, you're doing building work or you're purchasing an item. Strictly as buying a kettle as a capital project. Most of the capital projects we're going to be talking here will be things like roof repairs, installing a kitchen, stuff that is involving building work. You'll be getting quotes, you may be involved with VAT, but we're talking about a purchase of something that is physical. Revenue and core, that's going to be stuff like heating, lighting. Increasingly, as life gets very expensive, cost of living crisis, that could include food. You're setting up a food bank, food project. You might need a bit of capital work. You're buying freezers, you're putting in electrics, but a lot of that is going to be revenue. You're buying the food for the people that come into your church. Finally, staffing, as it says really, but please, when you're putting together your project, do remember to put in things like national insurance, pension, staff costs, and those staff costs could include a little bit of capital, for example, a phone or a laptop. Themes. Now, many projects will require a theme because the funder requires a theme. 4 or 5 years ago, almost all the major funders, it was COVID response. If you didn't address COVID in some form, really you might as well not be bothering. At the moment, there's quite a few that are still talking about cost of living crisis. Actually, that's not really been mentioned much in the news so much as a phrase. It's very, very real, particularly in communities like Ashton, where I am now. So look out for things that are talking about cost of living. Community, you may see that described in terms of things like cohesion, same thing. Getting people together in your building as part of your bigger project. Which brings me on to the absolutely essential point. No one is going to give you money just for a building, just for a mini project. It's all about people. So remember, every single phase of every single bit of every project you ever do, it's about people. You don't want a church roof. You want to make the space amenable, capable of accommodating a project for people. You don't want a new kitchen. You are setting up a project that is giving much needed resources to local people. And to that end, you're going to feed them. To that end, you need a kitchen. You see the way I'm looking here? It's people first when you write the application, and then you are funding to those means for your end, which really brings us to point 3 on the slide here. 2 very similar words that you will see again and again on the forms, easy to misunderstand. Outcome is the principal thing that you're aiming for. Your kitchen, for example, could be an output towards an outcome. You've got a lot of local people who are isolated and you need to put together a new cafe. The output could be that you're putting a new roof on the building, but the outcome is that you're preserving the heritage of the building so that future users, people, can use that space for centuries to come. Outputs, often you've got a vast number of them. It's quite possible to have a single outcome at the end. But remember, all of that is really essentially, it's got to be about people. Funders don't want to fund anything that doesn't involve real local people. Thank you, Paul. Right, why does someone want to give you money? Now, that's a really interesting question. There's different sorts of funds giving in different sorts of ways. Sometimes a company has to give you money because that's the way it's been set up. It's a legal obligation. So, for example, a lot of trusts and whatnot have to give out money because otherwise they get taxed out of existence. Sometimes, for example, the lottery, that's what they were actually set up to do. A majority of the money that they generate is given out in grants. That's what their constitution decides that they must do. Sometimes a funder gives because they get a lot back themselves. The classic in this particular instance are things like the land tax people. Your bins are collected by Suez and Viridor and Veolia and Wren and such like. They own landfill tax, landfill sites, and they pay a lot of tax on every kilogram that is put into their landfill sites. Well, they're paying a lot of tax. They don't like paying tax because it means that they get less profit. If they give out grants, principally for building capital projects, if they give out grants, the amount of tax they pay is a smaller percentage. So they're not giving out money from sheer goodness. They're giving out grants because, well, it makes their bottom line a lot more user-friendly to their shareholders. Sometimes money is given simply because of the goodness of their heart. Some of the old-fashioned trusts and philanthropists would be an example there. Charities. There will be restrictions on what you can and cannot claim for. I alluded to that at the beginning. In the current climate in Britain, a lot of trusts and funders will not let you say, I want to fund a Christian project. Don't worry about it. A lot of the projects that we're talking about aren't explicitly Christian. They're probably going to be run by Christians, they're probably going to be run in local churches, but they don't have to be explicitly Christian to do kingdom work. Setting up a cafe, feeding, clothing, nurturing, stopping loneliness. Those aren't explicitly, exclusively Christian things, but they are the sort of things that Christians ought to be doing. A lot of the funds that you'll be applying to will have other restrictions. For example, you can't do anything overtly political, you can't buy property, you can't do anything overseas and whatnot. Just one final thing before we move on. Some of the funds will be telling you that you can't do it for Christian work. They can't do this, you can't do that. Just remember what you put in your original grant application. You can't spend that money on something that isn't in your grant application. So once they've decided to give you the grant, and it's probably going to be itemized fairly closely, this for food, that for capital, this for staff, that for core, you can't spend it on anything else. So when it hits your budget, your spreadsheet, you'll often describe that as a restricted fund. It's restricted insofar as you can't do anything with it other than that which has been given to you to do. Occasionally, you may get monies that aren't restricted, but I'm assuming for the rest of the stuff I'm talking about that it will be restricted. One final thing, in case you've already forgotten, it's all about people. Thank you, Paul.
Lovely. Thanks, Paul Monk. So it's over to me now to look at what we call developing the case for support, which is really the sort of the building blocks, really, of your fundraising campaign. As it says on the screen there, what's the need? what have you identified in terms of what are you needing funding for? How are you going to meet the challenges, the need that you've identified? What project might you be putting in place? How's that project going to run? And those all important outputs and outcomes that Paul had touched upon earlier on. And within all of that second stage is looking on finding the right supporters and the right donors that are going to fund your project. So starting at the beginning, identifying what the need is. How are you going to identify what that need is? It might be through mission that you're already delivering through your church mission. It might be that you've been working with partners, maybe with other organisations in your community, maybe schools, maybe health organisations, and a need has been identified through there. Increasingly, what we're seeing, funders are wanting to see community consultation. And so that's a really, if you haven't done community consultation or had those conversations with people in your local community to support that evidence of need, then that's something that's worth looking at doing. And it was interesting, I was talking to one of the grant officers from the Benefactor Trust last week. We were doing a joint presentation together. For those who aren't aware, Ecclesiastical, so my company is owned by the Benefactor Trust. We're owned by a charity. And he was saying that he can see very clearly those applications where they've really done detailed or some level of community consultation. And he said it really makes the applications stand out, because he said what it indicates to the Benefactor Trust is this isn't just a church that thinks this is what is needed, but by doing that consultation, by having those conversations, the church is able to demonstrate that there is a real need there because of the conversations that they've had. So I really urge you to think about that community consultation. And it doesn't have to be anything particularly complicated. It can just be inviting people in to your church, invite them for a cup of tea, piece of cake, and just start talking to them about what it is that they are seeing as issues in their community. So once you've collated what those needs are, and part of the collation of information will be pulling together statistics, which Paul Monk will go on in a future slide to talk about where you might get that statistical information, because that statistical information can really provide powerful messages and pan out a little bit more about what the needs are. Those statistics can be really important. So Paul will be talking about that in more detail, about how you can start obtaining that statistical information. So you've poured all this together in this case for support document, and then you'll go on to talk about what the solutions are. You've identified isolation in your community. You've identified a need for maybe an after school club. So the solution might be that you're looking to provide a football club for school children when school finishes, and the outcome of that might be that you've got children that are fitter, you've got children that are less socially isolated, and everything that goes with actually playing sport and the benefits that can bring. So you can demonstrate really clearly, you've identified the need, this is what you're going to have in place, and the grant funding is going to enable this outcome. And it's providing that really compelling reason as to why grant funders should want to support your project amongst sometimes the many hundred of applications that they might have. Certainly going back to the Benefactor Trust, they get many more applications we're seeing year on year, applications are increasing. So competition, I think, is getting harder and harder. I've been working with churches for the sort of last 10, 15 years. And certainly in that time, I've seen the funding regime much, much harder. I think the bar is getting much higher. The information that churches are having to provide is much more detailed than what it used to be. And that's because the competition is there. Part of your case for support, you want to be thinking about the costs for the project. You need to get some professional advice. Maybe if you're looking at a capital project, do you need to be employing an architect, a quantity surveyor, making sure you're, the checks and balances in terms of who you're employing, who you're appointing, when you're appointing them. Bringing all of that together so you've got a really solid base, so that when you go in to submit your application, you know that your costs are accurate, or as accurate as they can be with the information that you've got. Just to pick up on a point Paul mentioned in his last slide about costs, and obviously you can only use grant for what you ask for. Sometimes what may happen is, for some unknown reason, unforeseen circumstances, costs could increase, and we certainly saw that sort of after COVID, where capital costs increased because materials became very much more expensive because of supply chain issues around COVID. So sometimes it can be completely out of your control as to why your costs increase. And it's always worth going back and having a conversation with the funders that have given you some initial grant funding, because it may be that they have a little bit more money sloshing around. It might be that other projects have failed, grant has been given back so that they've got some sort of additional money and grants that they can give you. So it's always worth having a conversation with the people who've already provided funds for you, because, like I said, they might well be able to help you out with increasing the grant. And sometimes it can help them out because they will have their own targets to hit. And sometimes it's just about asking them, hitting lucky and just asking them at the right time. Maybe if they're coming to the end of their financial quarter, or the end of the financial year, when they really do need to be having spent all of that grant allocation for that year. Finding the right supporters is absolutely key, and that's about doing your homework and making sure that you're going to the right grant funders that are going to be able to fund your sort of project. There's lots and lots of different grant funders. They've got lots of different criteria. They've got lots of different priorities, and then depending on sort of the criteria that they work within, there may be things that they can and won't be able to fund. So making sure you're looking for the right grant funders. For churches in Manchester and Leeds Diocese, you're fortunate because you've got the database, a searchable database that you can use to help you do some of the footwork on identifying some funders. Basically, the database works. I think Paul Bailey, I think you provide more training on this, but basically
that was last Thursday. So some of the people who were here last Thursday are here tonight, but there's a link later on in the slides, and I'll talk more about that free service that Heather's just mentioned.
Brilliant. I will not talk any further on that one if that's going to be covered. Invariably, and it's a real frustration, I know, with churches, that each grant funder often wants different supporting information and documentation. They have slightly different application forms. They have different deadlines. They'll have different amounts of grants that they need, that they they will award. So again, that's all about doing research, and I can't emphasize enough the more background work you do before you start actually putting pen to paper to complete your application. If you do your homework to begin with, it's going to save you going up the wrong alley, or the frustrations of applying to the wrong funder or not providing the information that they want. And keeping records is a really important part of that, because you'll no doubt be applying to multiple funders, and keeping a track of when there are deadlines, when you're likely to hear back from funders, the sort of, the key people that you need to be talking to. If you're not keeping those records, it can be really easy to lose track. Well, it can be easy to lose track. And the last thing you want to be doing is contacting a grant funder that you've already been turned down for, because your record keeping isn't accurate enough that you've not picked up that you've already applied to that grant funder. So keeping records is really important. What Paul will be sending out after this session, Ecclesiastical have got a fundraising hub, and there's lots and lots of resources that you can avail yourself on. And one of the templates that we've got is for record keeping, so that you can keep a record of grant funders that you've applied for, what the outcome is, deadlines, etc. And I think it's on to the next slide, please, Paul B.
Me again.
Oh, hold on, gone too far. There we go.
Thank you. We're starting to look at tricks of the trade here. Imagine that you want to put in a new church kitchen, say. It's, in terms of a project, something that's very easily split into different component parts. And you'll be very wise at the beginning of the project to sit down and calculate the complete value of what you want. So I'm talking about, for example, stripping out which was there before, plastering, rewiring, putting in units and putting in equipment and whatnot. Imagine that a member of your congregation is a good plasterer, and he's offered, that's the kindness of his heart, because he's a good bloke, he's a member of your congregation, he is going to do that plastering for you. Well, he's going to buy the plaster, but the actual labour, the expensive bit, he's just going to give it to you. Nevertheless, that labour was part of the original calculated cost, but he's going to do it for free. He's going to give you, in effect, £5,000 worth of free labour. When you do your budgeting, you can therefore say that you've already got £5,000 worth of the total budget already done. You found that money. Well, he found it in kind. He's a kind man. That's the way to remember the way it works. So if you can find people to do these little jobs or larger jobs, you can then say to the other funders, look, you're not being asked to fund for 100% of the project. You're being asked to fund for considerably less. Two things that come from that. Firstly, it's a rare funder who will give you 100%. As one generalization would suggest, the smaller the proportion that you're asking for, the more likely it is they're going to fund, because the risk to them is itself smaller. But also, if they're not funding 100% because a lot of other people are funding it, it's also saying that other people have looked at the project and trust it themselves. Other people look at it and have themselves put their hand in their pocket. In effect, a sense of pre-selection has already occurred before your first grant form has even been submitted. So, in kind is a very valuable way of looking at things. Another type of in kind, a lot of projects you're going to need volunteer work. Volunteers, they're putting in their time. And in a lot of cases, you can actually fund the amount of time necessary. And you can fund it pretty closely because of the national minimum wage, for example. You can say how much in-kind time has been accruing through the volunteer running a cafe, a food bank, all these different projects. Calculate how much work is being done, and you actually find that a huge amount of money already in kind is there. Match funding is slightly different. Right, I'm going to start talking about the way that you can make different parts of a project work in a complementary way, enhancing from one source through various other sources. It's a kind of in kind, but look at this. Imagine I'm going to talk again about your kitchen that you're putting into your church. Someone buys you a new kettle. Straight away, you can say, look, I've already got 20 quid towards the overall cost. You're wanting to put quite a lot of equipment into your kitchen, so you bundle up together all the other stuff that you want. The next one you say, well, I've already got 20 quid here, and the stuff on top of the surfaces is going to be what, 300-400. Well, I've got 20 quid. They say, well, that's good. Someone's trusting you. Tell you what, I'll give you a couple of hundred. You've only got another 200 left. Well, they're putting money in towards that phase of the project, that bit. So you've got 20, you've got another 200, you've got 220, you need what, 400? And you say to the next one, well, I need 400, but I've got 220 already, two separate people. They say, that's good. Here's the remainder. The first phase is now complete. You then start thinking about the next bit. For example, it's the units. Well, let's say the units plus the stuff on top of the units. You can say, well, look, the stuff on top of the units, I've already got all of that in place already. It's been matched. People have given me that money, those items. I'm therefore not asking for 100% grant because I've already got that stuff. Well done, they say. You're working hard, aren't you? This, by the way, is where the records are really useful. And then you start the next phase, having got all those units in place, 3,000 or 4,000, I don't know, plus the stuff on top of the units, several hundred. And you then start thinking about the larger grants that you need to attract. Replastering, rewiring, maybe a bit of building work, maybe, do some really expensive stuff. And at each phase, what you're doing is you're bundling as in the same concept, you've got your phone, the broadband in at the same time. You're bundling in all these different elements, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But at no time are you saying to a funder, I want 100%. This is often called snowballing. Remember, right, you're a 5-year-old, you've got that first sprinkling of snow on your lawn, and in cold hands, you pack together a small amount of snow, and then you start rolling it across your lawn. Do you remember doing that? It gets bigger, doesn't it? Fast. That's what you're doing. You are multiplying, starting from a very small base, and it gets bigger really quite quickly. Snowball is really effective, really very effective way of getting a project from start to finish. Lots of pitfalls, sometimes getting your ducks in order. Some of the grants, you just can't get them at the right time. Sometimes things go up dramatically in cost. Talking a lot about tariffs in the news even today. And some of the sources aren't suddenly eligible. Sometimes you need to have spent the grant by the time the next one is coming in, and so forth. These are really annoying, and it's real life, I'm afraid. But match funding, which can include in-kind funding, can very powerfully enhance your fundraising potential. Thank you, Paul. Right, we're going now into the tricks of the trade, but more to do with the actual writing of your form. You now know what most of the jargon means. You now know some of the tricks of the trade in terms of in kind, match funding, multiplying, snowballing. Now let's think about the actual forms itself. Be concise. Now, most of the forms, I would suggest almost all these days, that you ever do will be online. And a lot of them will actually have a word counter. If you actually answer the questions on the form, you'll often find that you quickly not only reach the word limit, you actually want to write more. Personally, I find it's very useful to write on, say, a Word document because it spell checks for you, that sort of thing. Then just cut and paste the whole thing into that annoying box on the form, at which point it flashes red and says, sorry, it's too long. So here's a few tricks that make it easier to get the word count down. Put it in the active sense rather than passive sense. Silly example. The ascent of the hill was undertaken by Jack and Jill in order that a pail of water might be fetched. Long. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Short. Actually, it sounds better too. Make every word count. Sometimes a single word can say the same as several words. As soon as you find yourself saying things like, as I said before, well, you're automatically duplicating, and therefore you can cut your words down. Get someone else to look at it. Professionalism. I did mention right at the beginning that I was a scientist in my previous life. Worked in one or two of the big universities in Manchester. More people failed their exams because they answered a question they wanted to be on the paper than people who actually answered the real question and got it wrong. Answer the question on the form. Sometimes you might not even understand what the question is asking you. It's in jargon, it's not written very well. Surprisingly often, it's not written very well. Phone them, ask them, go to the hints, go to the section on the website accompanying it. It may even have worked examples of the sort of thing they're asking for. But answer the question, answer all the questions. When I'm saying here attention to detail, numeracy and grammar, firstly, numeracy, make sure that the numbers at the beginning of the form are the same as the numbers at the end of the form. Sometimes forms add up for you, sometimes they don't. And when it doesn't, and your numbers don't add up, you're going to look a bit silly. Get it checked. Get someone else to check it for you. And in terms of the grammar, I would recommend that's quite important. As Heather was saying, a lot of funders at the moment are raising the bar. So if your form looks good, is presented well, by which I mean the grammar, and elementary things like that, you're going to put the bloke, the lady who's reading the form into a better mood. They're more likely to accept what you're saying if it's written in such a form that they can quickly gather the sense of what you're talking about. Reminder, what you're talking about is people. If they can get that sense very quickly, they're going to like your form more. Slight misquote from Winston Churchill. If time is not taken in the writing of prose, the time will be taken in the reading. Time. Well, I don't know about you, but a lot of these forms are done in my spare time. I've got the day job to do. So what I tend to do is I've got a whole file of standard paragraphs. I'll obviously have to amend them occasionally, sometimes often, update them, the statistics we're going to talk about later. But some of the paragraphs are going to be timeless. Your address. Well, that's 10, 15 words that you can mistype. Just cut and paste it. What does your organization do? Well, write a standard paragraph. And you remember I was talking about Christianity. No one seems to mind if you say we are a church and our primary purpose is to serve God. But then say, to that end, and then write something about building the kingdom. Don't use the word kingdom. Talk about social cohesion, talk about need. write a standard paragraph, and then you've automatically saved your time next time. And furthermore, if it's worked in previous grants, well, it must be acceptable. Work efficiently. And at the bottom of your screen there, I can't express that too often. Get a second opinion. Particularly if you're writing on screen, you tend to read what you think you've written. You might have missed a word. It might not make sense. You know what it means. Does somebody else? So this is working in a cleverer way. Thank you, Paul. Acronyms. Now, acronyms. These are acronyms that you're going to see again and again. So I'm going to go through them quite closely, but not slowly. Now, a lot of the forms you're going to be dealing with, obviously you're dealing with people. Well, you're dealing therefore with people in real places, and a lot of those real people in real places are in real places that aren't the nice place you'd like them to be. They're deprived. How do you prove they are deprived? Well, you can't just say it's needy. Prove it. Well, how do you prove it? Government statisticians have got 7 different baskets, or baskets is a technical phrase in this case, types of deprivation that they tend to look at. So it's life expectancy, it's levels of education, it's levels of health, isolation, loneliness, housing stock, things like that. And then it's a weighted, or before I say that, and then each of those 7, we've got really good statistics, for example, from the census. You would then just list each area from top, absolutely no deprivation whatsoever, through to the bottom, absolutely worst. News today, the worst is going to be Clacton in Essex. They're listed, so you'll see against each of those deprivation types a little number, just saying out of the whichever number of, yes, thank you, Paul. You'll get an index for each of those different types of deprivation. And then there's a weighted average of all those 7, multiple deprivation. You'll notice there, index of multiple deprivation, IMD. The 21 is simply saying it's from the census, which was in 2021. The IMD indices are recalculated. Well, it used to be literally every 5 years. With computers, it's easier to do now. Some data is IMD 23, some of it's still 21. But these data are gold dust because they're an objective way of saying this is the level of deprivation that I've got. If you go to the Church Urban Fund, cuf.org, the Church Urban Fund is part of the Church of England, wholly owned subsidiary charity of the Church of England. The Church Urban Fund gives you all this data per parish. So you type in the name of your parish, in my case, Parish of the Good Shepherd, comma, Ashton underline, and there it is, it's on the screen. Lots of pie charts, so much data, it's an embarrassment of riches. It will tell you where you are. It's going to be even bigger, rurally. Sometimes,
Paul, could you just repeat that? Because your sound just dropped out.
yeah, it's saying my internet is unstable. Yeah, if you're a rural parish, you're geographically going to be a very large area. And the larger the area, quite often, you then get pockets of deprivation or pockets of relative affluence, and that can skew the data quite badly. So sometimes a parish is a really useful statistical area, but sometimes you want to drill down to something much, much more local. At which point you want a lower level super output area. Forget what it means. as far as we're concerned, it simply means, say, 100 houses, 300 or 400 people. So it's around your church or around the school that you're working with, and so forth. And across an entire parish, typically a large geographical parish like mine, I'm covered by 5 local super output areas. And in my case, they vary from 0.7% at the very, very bottom nationally through to about 30% from the bottom. 30%? That's a big variation. There's one extremely wealthy estate slap bang in the middle of the local super output area. If you stripped that out, it would go from 30% nationally to about 4% nationally. Or stated another way, this one large estate is wealthy. Careful of what your statistics say. But these data, local super output areas, there's something like 32,000 of them. Parishes, there's about 13,000. So once you know where you are in the standard lists, you are local super output area 12,040. Well, that's out of 32,000, 31,000. Do the maths. The final acronym, voluntary, community, faith, you tend to use that in conjunction with sector. The first sector is the government. The second sector tends to be business. Third sector, a phrase you don't really see these days, is the voluntary, community, faith sector. That acronym sometimes gets longer, VCFSE, social enterprise. So you're talking tiny business, local artists or whatever, people making money but self-employed, that sort of thing, in a voluntary sector type environment, the local community good. So these acronyms, everyone reading your form will understand these acronyms. So these could be a useful way to get your word count down when you're compiling your form. Thank you, Paul. Right, these are some standard paragraphs that I cut and paste relatively often. And I'm just using them as an example of how statistics can be used. The first one on the left, St. Peter's Church, is one of the churches in the parish of the Good Shepherd. I could just say, oh my goodness, I need lots of money because there is a lot of need. Well, it's a small number of words, but it doesn't say anything. So I'm starting by saying which local super output area it resides in. The first number is the nationally recognised number. The second one in brackets, Tameside 013D. Most local authorities have got their own acronyms. Doesn't matter really. Notice there in terms of IND 22. So that's more modern data. The more modern, the better. I've not even said where some of this data comes from yet. So it's just exploring the levels of deprivation that are occurring within that one very small localized patch around that church. That particular church is useful saying what's going around the church. As a generalization, the more deprived, you've got fewer cars, transport is needed, the more deprived people are going to travel shorter and shorter distances. So if you're really deprived, talk about the area around your venue. One on the right is really saying much the same, though it's talking much more about the people rather than what they're living in. So you've got profiling, talking about backgrounds, talking about faith, talking about other establishments possibly doing work that's similar or at least complementary. For these 2 paragraphs, I can give you chapter and verse for all of this stuff. I can just cut and paste it and put it in the form, and automatically it's going to look more authoritative than it did look before that sort of data was put in. Thank you, Paul.
Back to me, I think. Um, So project evaluation is a really important aspect of your project, and it ties in with what we were talking about earlier on about the output, the difference that the project will make, the difference that the grant money given is going to make. And I mean, ultimately, that's what grant funders want to see. What difference has the grant we provided made? What impact has it had? I mean, predominantly, it's about the impact it has on changing people's lives, even if you're talking about building fabric, or that still is about how it's impacted people. So you really need to think about project evaluation right at the beginning, and some applications will even ask you about how you're going to evaluate your project. So think about it from the beginning when you're compiling your project proposal. How are you going to know the difference that your project has made? How are you going to measure that? And part of that is about knowing where your starting point is, because if you've got that firm starting point, you'll be able to measure and monitor the project as it goes along. And very much how you evaluate your project is going to depend on the project itself and the context of the project. But you certainly want to be thinking about who you're going to be engaging in part of your evaluation. It might be the funders themselves that have contributed to some funding. It might be individual donors. It could be other stakeholders. It could be, those stakeholders could be other organisations in your neighbourhood. It could be businesses. It could be users of the project. So think about how you're going to capture that evaluation. It could be capturing stuff that's come through on social media. Sometimes that can be a really good way if churches are active on social media, of people making comments on social media. Are there newspaper articles that you can include? Can you capture through maybe sending out a questionnaire to people who've used your project? I think part of the evaluation process as well is also thinking about how you acknowledge the grants that you've been given as you go along, and that's the power of thank you. And there's lots and lots of evidence to indicate that where individual funders or grant funders are thanked appropriately, they become engaged with your project and are more likely to give again, because they have an interest in your project, particularly if you can demonstrate the difference that their contribution has made. So again, think about how you're going to thank donors and contributors to your project. It might be some larger projects, larger grant funders, certainly the Heritage Lottery Fund. They will often expect some sort of plaque to be put up acknowledging their contribution. So if you are looking at putting a plaque up, obviously make sure you're talking with DAC to make sure you're getting the right permissions in place before you start putting those plaques up. I think the other really important thing about project evaluation and thanks is about building in celebrations, because on the whole, looking for funding can be a long and sometimes tortuous process, and it can be really demanding. And you'll have successes and you'll have applications that aren't successful. So celebrating those successes will really carry you through those lower parts of the project life. And I think having some sort of celebration event at the end where you can bring the various parties together that have been involved in the project is a really good way of acknowledging and thanking.
I saw him before. I tried to get Rex on him, but Rex just scared him away. He didn't even try and eat him.
Oh,
Um, what I was going to say was, I know from some of the projects that Paul Monk has done, he's included a celebratory event at the end. And I know there was a wonderful Thanksgiving service that Paul kindly invited me to when I was a church buildings officer. And it was a really wonderful celebration, really, of all of the efforts that everyone had gone to. And you could really see the difference that it made to the church and wider community. It was, it was a fabric capital project. But I think it demonstrated really well, and that whole idea of celebrating, I think, is really important. And I don't think sometimes churches, and I'd say this from my own church, we're not always very good at celebrating our successes, because we don't like to see it as a boastful thing, do we? But I think it's a really important thing to do. Now, Paul B, I don't know whether the YouTube videos work, or will the link work? I always wait in anticipation at this bit. Will it, won't it?
I'm going to have a go now, because I didn't, unlike normally, where I've got them queued up, I didn't have chance tonight. So I'm just going to go and see if I can open them up now. So let me just drag that across to this side of the screen. Hopefully you'll be able to see the Church Urban Fund website page. There's a lot of stuff in here developed, if I remember rightly, with funding from Benefact as well, in terms of project planning, etc., and evaluating. There's some really good stuff in here. And then additionally, if I come back into here, I'm not going to click on the YouTube guide, because I can play it for at least 5 to 10 minutes, and you can watch that within your own time. But the key message within that webinar from Church Urban Fund, utilising those Benefact funded resources, is making a project evaluation an ongoing part of what you do. Don't do it at the end, just build it in to what you do as part of this project, but also build it into the life of the church, because whatever you're doing as part of your church activities, you want to make sure it's working. What do people think about it? Are they enjoying it? Is it bringing new people into the building, etc.? There's some really, really useful things within that. And then finally, just to go back to what Paul was just talking about in terms of IMD stuff, this is the link of the article from the BBC that I've just shared in the chat, with the latest IMD figures being released today. Just to illustrate Paul's point, I live in Trafford. That shows you the the breakdown of by wards within Trafford Council, and you can see the really dark red colours are the most deprived, the really sort of dark blue colours, and it just illustrates Paul's point about how just literally just down the road, sometimes one end of your parish versus the other end could be really deprived or not, as the case may be. So some lots of really interesting stuff there that you can utilize to illustrate your grants. So, and with that, I'm going to click on to the next slide.
Paul, sorry.
Sorry, yes, you go on,
sorry.
please, Heather.
Just going back to the project evaluation, sorry, something I should have mentioned was you can often cost in project evaluation as well, particularly with larger projects. If you felt you wanted to maybe outsource that to appoint somebody to help you with your project evaluation, and sometimes that can be a learning outcome. The whole project evaluation, it can be about people learning skills about project evaluation. So do think about being able to include costs for project evaluation as part of your overall project costs. and delivering your project. And I think the other, sorry, I will shut up, but I'll just say this last point. The other thing with evaluation is sometimes it can identify a second or third phase of a project as well, because the evaluation process might identify future needs. And if you've developed that good relationship with grant funders, they may well come back and fund a second and third part of that project because you've been able to deliver it successfully. Thanks, Paul.
No problem. So this slide talks about all sorts of other different resources that you can utilize. You can see how as I hover over the underlying links, the website addresses are there just for you to click on. So this includes Church of England resources around planning a building project. Each diocese will no doubt have their own resources around church buildings, like we do have in Manchester. Nationally renowned, however, is the Diocese of Hereford's Crossing the Threshold Toolkit, which is a fantastic resource with all sorts of links and documents and other tools around community engagement and involvement, but also about planning the different phases of your project, from capital expenditure or people-based, etc. The Parish Resources website from the Church of England is undergoing a major revamp over the last year, 18 months or so. So that's worthwhile having a look at. An external site, Church Bold, they have also some free downloadable resources that you can access and utilize. The Historic Religious Building Alliance, HRBA, they have a newsletter that you can sign up to keep you informed about all sorts of different issues connected to churches and other historic religious buildings. That can include funding information, as well as other wider information around, they've been heavily involved in campaigning to keep the VAT reclaim process open for listed buildings and trying to expand that by campaigning against the government. The National Churches Trust, very useful as a funder, but as with other resources available. Their House of Good report, published about 3 years or so ago and updated, is a fantastic tool outlining the amount of income generation, money saved by churches for the national and local economies. That has also been expanded in the last 12 months or so to include the House of Good Health report, which shows how churches help to save the government and the NHS monies by preventing things getting to the stage where people need to spend money on, whether it be prescriptions or other types of treatment. Church is very good at helping to prevent loneliness and other mental health issues by the activities that go on in their buildings. Have a look at the House of Good Health report. And then additionally, they've, I think early part of this year, they launched the House of Good Local, which is a lookup tool that you can access to look at local statistics and information that could be used to help and support your applications. COVID, as Paul mentioned, hasn't really gone away, but as a funding priority is a little bit old hat. But there's a research project there that's highlighted about the impact of COVID, and COVID has fed straight into cost of living. It hasn't really gone away as an impact, particularly on younger people. Have a look at that if that's something that would be useful. Benefact Trust, like National Churches Trust, are a specialist church funder. their hyperlink for their website and the resources that are provided on that site is provided there. Also, church chair grants, care grants, and then Entrust. That's the landfilled community fund that Paul highlighted earlier on, where if you live near a local landfill site, the people that run those sites can pay local lower taxation, and that that lower taxation then gets turned into grant funding opportunities. Often very strict um, 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 sort of guidance is available. You've got to be within so many miles of one of their local sites, whether that's Viridor or other types of funders like that. The Diocese of Manchester has its own grants funding page on there. No doubt other dioceses will have that available as well. And the Open for Community free to use grant search portal that Heather mentioned kindly is available across all four dioceses who are here tonight. So Blackburn, Chester, Leeds, and Manchester, and that can be accessed by church schools and organizations that use your church building or use your church hall. They can register and utilize that free to use grant search portal as well. Manchester Diocese specific, the Council for Social Aid, which Paul is the chair of trustees, they provide small grants throughout the year and an annual grant, larger grant process that happens once a year. Church of England website, they're building a generous church section. It's got a whole host of different resources to support churches with becoming more generous and living generous lives, including some information from on grant funders. The Church of England has also launched another online project called Cornerstone, which has a grant search portal as part of that. But from my experience, the Open for Community site is much better and offers a much greater range of services and searchability functions. Many churches will come across Victorian Society. They'll either be Victorian buildings or older buildings that have been reordered in some way during Victorian times. Always worthwhile having a look at their site and looking at consulting with them as part of your wider community consultation about what you're planning to do within your buildings to meet the needs of your local community. And then finally, but not least, Ecclesiastical's fundraising hub. Heather's mentioned that on a couple of occasions. Fantastic tool, free, lots of different resources and videos, webinars that you can sign up to attend. Again, worthwhile having a look there and seeing if there are resources that you can utilize to help you to achieve what you want to do at your church. Contacts for each diocese. Obviously, there's me at the top. Reverend Alan Simpson is the DAC secretary at Manchester Diocese, and his assistant Judith is also a good point of call around any building inquiries. If we move across into Chester, I work closely with Sheena, who's their Buildings for Missions advisor, and their DAC secretary is Caroline. We're moving to Leeds. I work closely with Janet and with Beth, who were part of their stewardship team. And there's the details for their DAC secretary, Lisa. And then if we move into Blackburn, stewardship more broadly is Stephanie. But in this area, I've been particularly working with Sarah about community development funding and their church buildings officer, senior church buildings officer, who I understand is the equivalent of their DAC, is Jen, with her contact details available there as well. And then I'll be sharing these and also the other emails that I've just mentioned when I send the stuff out from tonight's meeting, the recording, the slides, and the other two guides that I mentioned at the start. There's Heather's contact details and Paul's contact details. Although we are very supportive and will be helpful with churches contacting us from different dioceses, it's always really useful to develop those contacts and speak to people from your own diocese wherever possible. But I know that Heather and Paul have been very, very supportive after previous sessions of these webinars, online meetings, to support churches who have attended. And with that, time for questions. So I'm going to do as I promised earlier on. I'm going to stop the recording now.